We're all here for another 27 ounces? Yeah, let's do it.
Rick Ness didn't just lose money. He watched $2 million disappear in the harshest way possible. Not on paper, not through accounting tricks or write-offs. This was real cash, investor trust, personal risk. Years of belief poured into ground that gave almost nothing back. The Klondike doesn't deal in sympathy. It doesn't reward effort or soften failure. It runs on one brutal equation: what you spent versus what you recovered. And for Rick, that equation left him $2 million in the red. But numbers alone don't tell the full story. Because while the loss looked like an ending, it was actually building something invisible. Over the next 12 years, that failure became the foundation of something far bigger than anyone could measure at the time. And then came the answer: $500 million in gold. Not from luck, not from a sudden breakthrough, but from the version of Rick Ness that those 12 years of struggle created. The man who struck gold wasn't the same man who lost it all. He was sharper, tougher, more precise, forged by every setback that came before. The $2 million loss, that was just chapter 1. The $500 million, that's the conclusion. And everything in between, every mistake, every adjustment, every season of pushing forward, is what makes that ending matter. Hit like and subscribe, because this isn't just a comeback story. It's proof that failure isn't the opposite of success. Sometimes it's the blueprint for it. Before everything fell apart, Rick entered the Klondike with something rare, a balance most miners never have. He carried both humility and confidence at the same time. The humility came from knowing he was new. Coming from a music background, Rick had the drive and discipline, but not the deep mining experience others had. He didn't pretend otherwise. He listened, learned, and absorbed everything around him. Working alongside Parker Schnabel, he picked up more than just technical skills. He studied decision-making, efficiency, and how to read the ground like a seasoned operator. He didn't just watch, he understood. And that's where the confidence came from. He wasn't guessing. He had seen what worked at the highest level. He knew what a successful operation looked like, and believed he could build one himself. When Rick finally stepped out on his own, that mix of confidence and humility gave him a real shot. And in the beginning, it showed. His early seasons weren't explosive, but they were steady. Production improved bit by bit. Costs were controlled. The numbers weren't massive, but they were moving in the right direction. It looked like a real operation finding its rhythm. His crew reflected that same mindset. Rick didn't lead with ego or flashy success. He led by example. He worked just as hard as everyone else. He stayed honest about the situation. And every decision he made included his crew, not just the bottom line. That kind of leadership built trust, which is exactly why the loss hit so hard. Because that $2 million wasn't just a number. It carried people behind it. Investors who believed in him, a crew that gave everything. A season's worth of effort turned into nothing. It wasn't just financial, it was personal. And the way it happened made it even worse. The collapse didn't come all at once. It built over 2 seasons. The first season was rough, equipment failures, ground that didn't deliver, costs climbing faster than gold production. It was bad, but not fatal. Rick adapted. He cut costs, shifted focus, doubled down on better sections of land. He kept communication open, kept confidence alive, and pushed forward with a clear plan. Then came season 2, and everything unraveled. The plan was solid, the execution was strong, but the ground didn't cooperate. The areas that should have produced didn't. Equipment that had been fixed started breaking again, at the worst possible times. And the safety net? It disappeared. By the middle of that season, Rick wasn't mining with confidence anymore. He was mining on borrowed time and borrowed money. The investor conversations were the hardest part, not because Rick avoided them, but because he didn't. He faced them head on, with the same honesty he brought to everything. No sugarcoating, no false optimism. He told them exactly what was happening, even when the truth was uncomfortable. And in the end, the numbers were undeniable. Across 2 brutal seasons, the total loss reached $2 million. On the final day, Rick stood with his crew and did what he had always done. He told the truth. The operation was over. The money was gone. There was no next season waiting. One by one, he thanked them. Not casually, not out of obligation, but sincerely. He recognized every person who had invested their time, effort, and belief into something that hadn't paid off. Some of them told him they'd return if he ever tried again. Rick appreciated that, but he didn't make promises he couldn't guarantee. Then he left the Klondike and started over. Not for a few months, not for a quick reset, for 12 years. And 12 years isn't just a comeback. It's an entirely new career. Most people who lose that kind of money in mining don't return. The financial damage is too severe, the reputation hit is too visible, and the emotional weight of rebuilding something that already failed once is too heavy to carry for that long. But Rick didn't rush back. He didn't return in desperation or denial, chasing a quick redemption. He came back only when he was ready, only after he had rebuilt something solid, quietly, away from the spotlight, away from the judgment of the mining world. Looking back, Rick has described those 12 years as 3 distinct phases. The first phase was recovery. Not just emotionally, but intellectually and financially. He stepped away from mining and returned to work he already knew, music. The same discipline and resilience that carried him through years of touring were still there, and he leaned on them. He worked consistently, rebuilding his finances piece by piece. But more importantly, he studied the failure, not obsessively. That's not who Rick is, but carefully, methodically. He wanted clarity, not regret. And what he discovered wasn't a simple mistake. It was a gap. The land he had chosen wasn't bad. It just wasn't right for him. The geological data had been standard. His interpretation of it wasn't wrong. The problem was deeper. He hadn't yet learned how to match the ground to his own operation. Parker Schnabel could profit from marginal ground because his scale and efficiency allowed it. Rick's smaller operation didn't have that advantage. So, ground that worked for Parker didn't work for Rick. That realization changed everything. Rick didn't need better luck. He needed better alignment, higher gold concentration, simpler ground, less dependence on massive processing efficiency. It took 2 failed seasons and years of reflection to fully understand that, but once he did, it became a precise, usable insight. The second phase was preparation. Rick returned to the Klondike, but not as an owner. He came back quietly, working with other crews, sometimes even as a crew member himself. No ego, no rush to reclaim status. He was there to learn, this time with intention. He studied different types of ground. He sharpened his ability to read it. He built relationships with geologists who didn't just hand him reports. They explained them. They taught him how to think, not just what to do. Everything he had been missing before, he now pursued directly. The third phase was scouting. About a year and a half before launching his return, Rick began searching for the right claim. Not the most exciting one, not the most talked about, the right one. Based on everything he had learned, he evaluated dozens of properties, and he rejected most of them. Not because they were bad, but because they didn't meet his new standard. The Rick Ness criteria he had developed through years of hard-earned understanding. Higher concentration, lower complexity, costs that made sense at his scale. Then, in the 14th month of scouting, he found it. Not the best claim by traditional measures, but the best one for him. He secured it, built a small team, including 2 crew members who had stood by him during his worst moment, and designed an operation that directly addressed every weakness from his past failure. And then, he came back. Not as the same miner who left, but as someone rebuilt from the ground up. The Klondike noticed, and like always, the reaction was mixed. There was respect, because coming back at all takes something real. But there was also doubt, because the Klondike has seen plenty of comebacks fail. Rick didn't respond to either. He didn't try to prove anyone wrong. He didn't try to prove anyone right. He just went to work. Rick didn't change who he was. He changed how he operated. When he returned, the difference wasn't in attitude or effort. His leadership style, his bond with his crew, his willingness to outwork everyone on site. All of that remained exactly as people remembered. What changed was his decision-making. Every move he made now carried precision, ground selection, cost control, production targets. All of it reflected lessons that had been earned the hard way. This wasn't guesswork anymore. It was alignment, and the ground responded. From the very first week, the claim delivered. Not explosively, and that was intentional. Rick hadn't come back chasing dramatic wins. He had chosen reliability, stability, a claim that matched his operation instead of challenging it beyond its limits. That first season back didn't break records, but it did something far more important. It worked. The gold covered the costs. The operation generated profit. And for the first time, Rick didn't need to go back to investors asking for more. He was funding himself. More than that, he was learning. Because what that first season really gave him wasn't just profit, it was data. Real, operational data. The kind no survey can fully provide. He began to understand his ground in a way only mining it can teach. Where the pay streaks ran, how his equipment behaved under those exact conditions, how his cost structure reacted at his specific scale. That knowledge became the foundation for everything next. Season 2 wasn't a gamble. It was a calculated expansion. He added equipment, but only where the data justified it. He grew the crew, but only where it improved efficiency. He focused on the most promising sections, not based on theory, but on proven results. And the numbers followed exactly as expected. Profits increased. Season 3 was funded entirely by Season 2. The operation wasn't surviving anymore. It was building on itself. Steadily, intentionally, correctly. By the 4th season, something shifted. The Klondike stopped watching Rick as a comeback story and started watching him as a serious operator. The tone changed. No more sympathy. Now it was respect. Even Parker Schnabel took notice. He visited the site during that 4th season, walked the ground, studied the production, watched the wash plant in action. After a long look, he said, "You're mining differently than before." Rick didn't hesitate. "I'm mining correctly," he replied, "for this ground, for this operation, for the scale I'm running." Parker nodded. It was obvious. Then came the real question. "What are you targeting next season?" Rick showed him. A geological model, built not from theory alone, but from 4 full seasons of real production data. A detailed, evolving map of what lay beneath the surface. Parker studied it carefully. "If this model is right," he said slowly, "you're sitting on something big." Rick already knew. "That's why I've been building toward it," he said. "Not rushing it." Parker looked at him, not as a former crew member, but as an equal. "When do you go for it?" Rick's answer was simple. "Next season, when I'm ready." Season 5 was that moment. Everything pointed to it. 4 years of refining the ground, 4 years of collecting data, 4 years of building the operation to the exact scale required. The model didn't show just a streak. It showed a zone, wider, deeper, stronger. A primary deposit, not a secondary trace. And more importantly, it had likely been missed before. Buried below the depth previous operators had targeted, hidden beneath ground that didn't look promising from the surface, left untouched because no one had the patience or the data to see it. Rick had known it was there as early as Season 2, but he didn't rush, because reaching it too early would have meant reaching it unprepared. Now, he was ready. In week 3 of Season 5, he moved the operation directly onto the target. The first cut into that zone changed everything. Before the cleanup was even finished, the radio crackled. "Rick, you need to get to the wash plant." He didn't ask questions. He drove. He watched the gold come in, weighed it once, then again, just to be sure. Then he called his geological consultant. "The zone," Rick said. "First cut. I need you to help me understand what I'm seeing." He gave him the numbers. There was silence. 15 seconds. For someone who makes a living analyzing data, that kind of silence means something. Then the consultant spoke. "That's from one cut?" "One cut," Rick confirmed. Another pause. Then the realization landed. "Rick, that's not a pay streak." Silence again. "That's a primary deposit." Rick glanced back at his model, at the dimensions he had spent years refining. "How big is it?" the consultant asked. Rick told him. On the other end of the line, Rick could hear it. The quiet intensity of calculation, keys tapping, numbers being tested, assumptions being pushed. Then the consultant spoke. Conservatively, If that concentration holds across the zone you mapped, even close to what you just hit, you're looking at a multi-hundred-million-dollar deposit. Rick didn't respond immediately, because in that moment, it wasn't just about the number. It was about everything behind it. 12 years, a $2 million loss, a public failure, a private rebuild, all of it leading to this exact point. But Rick didn't ask the question most people would, not, how fast can I get it out? Not, how big is it really? He asked something else. How do I mine it correctly? And then he added, I don't want to rush this. That question, and that mindset, defined everything that followed. The consultant didn't give him shortcuts. He gave him strategy, measured extraction, data-driven adjustments, cost discipline, patience, and Rick followed it exactly. For 8 weeks, the zone produced, not wildly, not recklessly, but consistently. Some days were stronger than others. Gold never spreads evenly. But Rick didn't chase volume. He followed concentration. He adjusted cut by cut, always guided by what the ground was actually telling him. And over time, the average told the real story, a historic one. By the end of the season, 247,000 ounces of gold. At market value, roughly $500 million. After costs, $231 million in net profit. Let that sink in. From losing $2 million to generating $500 million. But not overnight. 5 seasons of disciplined return. 12 years of rebuilding. Every decision shaped by everything that went wrong the first time. Rick didn't just find gold. He proved that the operator he had become was capable of mining it the right way. He picked up the phone and called Parker. Rick gave him the number. There was silence. A long one. Then Parker finally said, "You waited 4 seasons for that?" Rick answered calmly. "I waited until I was ready." Another pause. Then Parker said something that carried more weight than any number. "You were always going to get here. I just didn't think it would take this long." Rick let out a small breath. "Neither did I." Then Parker asked the only question that mattered. "Was it worth it?" Rick looked at the data, at the result, at 12 years compressed into one moment, and he answered honestly, "Every single day." Because here's the truth. The headline is $500 million, but the real story is the 12 years, because that $500 million doesn't exist without them. It's not separate from the failure. It came from it. Rick didn't lose $2 million because he was careless. He lost it because he was operating on ground that didn't match his scale. And instead of quitting or blindly trying again, he spent over a decade understanding that difference, learning it, testing it, applying it, until he became the kind of operator who could stand on the right ground and actually succeed. Same Klondike, same gold, different version of the same man. And that difference, that's where the $500 million came from. Parker Schnabel set the standard in the Klondike. Rick Ness didn't beat it by copying him. He met it by becoming something else entirely, a version of himself built through failure, patience, and precision. The loss was $2 million. The answer was $500 million. And the difference was everything in between. Subscribe, because anyone who takes 12 years to prepare for a moment like that and then delivers when it counts is someone you don't want to lose track of.